Good morning, everyone. Resume hearing of submissions on variation 1, and at this stage we're in the final day of hearings 01 and 02, dealing with general and residential matters. And just before we hear from our submitters this morning, anything from the reporting officers for us?
No, sir.
Thank you very much. First submitter this morning is CSI Property Limited and Rolleston West Residential Limited. Good morning.
Good morning. Morning. Sorry. No. Now, we must confess before we start that we're a little bit confused with the variation process as to which hearing we're meant to be in at which particular time. So we had a stab at it, so you have to forgive us if we're in the wrong place at the wrong time. For this particular first submitter, we filed one set of legal submissions, and it essentially raises 2 points. The first is the preservation of the general residential zone for pieces of land that rezonings have been sought in the proposed plan, but for whatever reason the submitter isn't seeking MDRS in the variation. And also some commentary on highly productive land. So I rolled those two issues into one set of legal submissions, but Mr. Phillips did two pieces of evidence. The first one dealing with why he considers that we need to maintain a general residential zone, and why land in Rolleston and Lincoln can be zoned general residential and not at NDRS. And secondly, a second piece of evidence around highly versatile soils. So I don't know if it was helpful cutting and dicing it like that, but that's how we did it. I don't have anything particular to say about the legal submissions unless you've got any questions. And the panel has indicated they've got some questions for Mr. Phillips, and I'm not sure if it's on this GRZ issue or highly versatile land or both, but he's here to answer questions on that topic.
Thanks very much for that introduction. Mr. Phillips, did you want to say anything by way of summary before we proceed to questions?
No, I have some minor corrections to the, and I've got a printout to sort of ease with what those are.
Just while you're doing that, just also for the record, understood the panel had some questions for Ms. Lowenstein, who was unable to appear today. That question has been provided in writing, and we'll provide an answer in writing. So,
and then I just had one question from Mr. Akehurst.
Yes, and that's he's going to come on shortly,
Yep,
and that's in relation to the next submission, which is Rolleston Industrial Development, which is I suspect a Lincoln specific question.
That's right. Okay, good.
So the corrections that I've circulated are in relation to the Rolleston Industrial Developments Limited submission or evidence that I provided on the residential provisions. So we might come to that depending on which order you would like to pose questions.
So perhaps just so that we don't confuse things. So the two pieces of evidence we're just referring to at the moment, just for the moment, is Mr. Phillips on general, and then there's a Mr. Phillips on residential.
Yeah. So this table document that relates to the DE, the Lincoln Development Area,
we'll come to that in a minute.
PC 69 matter, isn't it? So that's next.
Yep.
All right. All right. So in terms of the first submitter then, CSI Property Limited and RWRL. Raymond, any questions for either Ms. Appleyard or Mr. Phillip? And Lindsay?
No, I actually don't have any specific questions. Relatively short briefs of evidence and to the point. So no, I don't have anything.
So the matter I'd like to ask you both about, and I understand the issue of concern to you, and correct me if I've got that wrong, is that where through a rezoning request earlier in the process, GRZ, general residential zoning, was sought, and then the officer's response, so that's not available as relief because of the Enabling Housing Act. Your concern is to ensure that should either an earlier hearing panel or this hearing panel decide that residential land use is appropriate, you want to preserve the ability to have GRZ so that that can residential land use can be facilitated with medium density residential standards being imposed later on through some other process. Is that,
Yes,
That's the
and to
issue.
be specific about it, the two submitters that I've got in mind are Next Level Developments at
Yes.
Lincoln
yeah,
and all of the land west of Duns Crossing Road. Neither of those submitters have sought NDRS.
Yep.
And when we come to the plan, actually the GRZ itself isn't a problem. It's just there's an overview saying that those GRZ zones aren't available in Rolleston and Lincoln if I read it.
Yeah.
And we're just wanting to get that overview sorted out. That's basically the long and short of it.
yeah. So having understood that as the issue, and I'd identified that the two areas of land of particular interest were probably that west of Duns Crossing Road and 1506 Spring Road.
Yes.
I'm just wondering why a more efficient process might be if collectively the hearing panels decided that residential land use was appropriate for one or both of those areas, that we wouldn't just exercise our powers under clause 99 2B of Schedule 1 and recommend to the council that MRZ be imposed on that land. Wouldn't that be a more efficient process?
I have absolutely no difficulty with that whatsoever.
I'd agree, albeit I think it's set out in my evidence. I think the only thing with that wording is I don't think it necessarily adds anything, and it does tie the district plan to those locations noted. So it could cause issues down the line. And so, as I noted in some of the other townships, there might in time be a basis to have a medium density residential zone, and that change would need to occur. So that, I mean, that change can occur. I think my conclusion in my evidence was the wording is neither here nor there. So why have it in and potentially limit limit its application?
But in terms of dealing with the specific matter, Mr. Phillips, would you endorse Ms. Appleyard's agreement that a clause 99 2B process might be more efficient?
Yes.
Now, in saying that, you shouldn't read anything into that suggestion regarding the merits of those,
No.
the panel's decisions
No,
on those
I-
two areas. And I was just trying to think of what the process might be that's most efficient for everyone.
Yeah, I mean, we totally agree with you, and that's a really helpful suggestion. And we don't really want to be mucking around with resource consent applications or plan changes or.
Yeah. Right, that's all I wanted to ask you about in relation to that, the first two submittals.
Was there anything on the HPL issue? That's
Not for me, anything.
no.
No, it's all good. We've sort of had a fairly good thrashing of that on the way
Yes.
through.
Great. So then the second submitter is, although it's Rolleston Industrial Developments Limited, it really does concern the PC 69 at Lincoln Land. So that does get a bit confusing. Now, we were confused, and submitters maybe as well, as to where the PC 69 land was to be considered in this hearing process. And the way we read minute 37, rightly or wrongly, is that for those pieces of lands that the council had included in the scope of its notified version, that in the variation and would be dealt with in the general residential hearing, and the Rolleston, Lincoln and Prebbleton hearings would be left to effectively the Me Too submissions where parties were seeking rezoning. So the difference here is it's not Rolleston Industrial Developments that's seeking the rezoning, it's Rolleston Industrial Developments with a submission that is supporting the council's inclusion of the PC 69 in Lincoln. Now, so we decided to put all our evidence in at the general residential hearing. We may find that submitters have read it differently and think they're turning up at the Lincoln hearing, and we'll deal with that at the time. We're not going to be silly on technicalities around process. But that's just an explanation for why we've done it now rather than wait for a Lincoln specific hearing.
I look, I understand that, and the evidence has been submitted, and we've obviously read it, and we'll bear that in mind for this hearing, and to the extent it's relevant to what issues raised at the Lincoln geospatial
Yeah.
hearing, we'll just, that can be rolled into that, no problem.
Thank
And I
you.
think Lincoln Voice they will be presenting their main case at that Lincoln.
Yes, we
hearing.
heard that this week. I think when Lincoln Voice presented, they said they would be coming later. So I suppose one positive thing is they've got the advantage of having seen what we've lodged. So that's probably helpful for the process overall.
Yeah.
The bit that I'm a little bit perplexed about, and I don't pretend to know the answer, is part B, which is these variations to the plan changes, which is ostensibly a completely separate process. How that fits in, and I don't know whether the panel has thought about that yet, but I'm completely perplexed about part B, which is changes to plan changes that have been partly determined by other commissioners and other hearings panels, and we're now looking at changing plan changes that are in various stages of processes, and I'm finding that whole process very difficult. The practical approach that we have taken to this is that practically decisions are going to be made on the proposed plan, and the variation, the operative plan is going to fall away. So we probably don't need to get too tangled up in esoteric arguments about part B, but I'm sure the panel was alive to that issue as well.
Yeah, well, certainly personally, I was confused about that as well. So I had a discussion with council staff simply about when the part B matters would be heard. And the advice back is that the part B matters will be heard as part of the Rolleston, Lincoln and Prebbleton hearings. To the extent that anyone wishes to speak to those matters, that'll be the opportunity for them to speak to. But you're quite right in terms of the process going forward. Once decisions are released on the proposed district plan, and once the independent hearing panel releases its decisions on variation 1, whatever's happened on the private plan changes will be to some extent
redundant.
Redundant,
That's how we've approached it practically.
Yep. So that raises an interesting question for submitters who are currently pursuing plan changes at the moment.
Oh,
over
there
the
was
next
one.
few
There's one
weeks.
being heard today. Plan change 79 is being heard today, and
The last 2 days.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's not for us to worry
No,
about.
no. So this was some specific evidence around obviously PC 69. We're happy to represent it at the Lincoln hearing so that submitters get to comment on it, but for better or worse, we're here now. So I think you've got some questions of Mr. Akehurst and Mr. Phillips. Are you on there, Greg?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we might turn you up a wee bit.
So just on that, what we could probably do to assist would be if the officers could, submitters who are coming to the Lincoln hearing, wanting to speak to PC 69 matters, just to advise them that the tranche of evidence from RIDL was
Which
made
one is it,
available to
General
this hearing, and it'll be on this hearing's webpage, if they, just so they know where to find it.
Yeah, and we won't resubmit all that again.
No, it's all right, you don't have to. Well, we know where it is, and as long as the submitters know where to find it, I think that's fine. Right, so Mr. Phillips, do you want to talk us through this change?
Certainly. So in paragraph 28, I got my NCZs and LCZs confused in the 5th line down. So that change should hopefully be self-explanatory. And then in attachment 3, in preparing the document, we tracked in the changes that were proposed to the rule, and then in the finalising of the document, those changes got accepted, so they disappeared. So the corrections in front of you just show the nature of the changes in terms of the additional text which is underlined and the deletions that are struck out.
All right, so it's a simple formatting thing rather than
Correct.
substantive
Substance.
change. Yeah, okay, that's great, thank you. So in terms of this submitter, is there anything that either of you wish to say by way of introduction before we go to questions?
No, we're happy.
No. So Raymond, do you have questions for Ms. Appleyard or Mr. Phillips?
Or Mr. Akehurst.
Yeah, I'll come to him. Yeah.
I'm not sure if I'm meant to be asking these questions here and now or Lincoln, but I'll just ask anyway.
Ask them now and we can, oh, if you push that mic. Raymond.
You get two guys, yeah.
Yeah, so just sorry, I'll just find them. That's right. So Mr. Phillips, you requested, sorry, I'm just trying to remember. I would like to know what your reply is to Miss Lou's residential S42A report at paragraph 7.30.2, where she responds to the request by the submitter about applying a qualifying matter to changing the focus. She says, particularly her considerations in the last sentence, changing the focus of policy from NDRS to the qualifying matter, and which could effectively dilute the outcome sought by legislation. Do you have any comments on that?
If you could just give me a moment to read that paragraph, because I don't think it was something I specifically addressed in my evidence.
So,
77.30.2.
just to clarify, the specific wording that we're seeking, is that on the top of page 27?
Yeah, that's my understanding, yes, yeah. Yeah.
That change there.
Yeah.
When I'm shooting from the hip a little bit because it's not a matter that I've really considered until you raised the question. I think when my reading at face value was that the change sought doesn't appear to be substantial. It was more sort of changing the focus of that wording. So I'm not sure I've fully shared the officer's concerns, but as I say, it's not something I've sort of given considered thought to.
My legal answer to that would be that the wording we have suggested, which is only minor wording change, is more consistent with the wording of the legislation than the original wording. So
Okay.
the change that we wanted was that you apply MDRS except to this extent necessary to accommodate a relevant qualifying matter. We would say that's more in line with the wording of the legislation than the original wording of that policy. So we're just trying to line up the wording with the Act.
So it was my understanding that you wanted the words included to the extent provided for in HPW 30, and then you also requested it for a specific qualifying matter.
So the wording that we seek is, there's a footnote 20 to the particular wording we seek, and if we go over the top of, it's on my page 27 of the section 42A report, and it's V1-0114 CSI and RWRL. Oh, sorry, are you referring to the next one down, V10115? Is that's the one you're referring to?
So it's my understanding that the submitter asked for two things as far as qualifying matters go. First, they asked for the words "to the extent of" be included in HPW 30, and then they also asked for that same wording to be applied to a specific qualifying matter. And the officer responded saying that it would have the effect of diluting the outcome sought by legislation.
That's not. And that will be in the
So-
general.
Yeah, no, so so my understanding is, I'm sorry if I'm confused, that this part of the officer's report relates to submission changes that we sought that are set out at footnote 20 of the report and the particular wording changes that are being referred to in that discussion. And Jocelyn might be able to help me here. V10114 and V10115. And they're on page 27. And we've just asked for the words except in circumstances where to be changed to the extent necessary to accommodate. And there's no change to the qualifying matters themselves. It's just that particular change there. Do you mind if I ask Jocelyn if I'm missing something here?
That's how I have understood the submission in respect of Res P3, PC, sorry.
Yeah, so it's not in relation to any specific qualifying matters. It's just to change, we haven't changed the qualifying matters. It's just to change the words except in circumstances where to the extent necessary to accommodate.
So you weren't asking for that to apply to specifically to RESZPC.
Yes. That's in another part, and that's not this part of this section 42. Oh,
Yeah.
sorry.
Not that.
So the provision that we sought to be changed is set out on page 27, at the top of page 27 was RESZPC.
Yep.
That was the provision that I understood that was sought to be changed, and the nature of the wording change was solely in relation to align with section 77I from the Amendment Act in terms of consistency. I don't know if that assists.
Yeah, no, thank you. I do have one more. And it relates to subdivision REQ7, where you've asked for a word change to matter of discretion from a high level of walkability to an acceptable level of walkability.
Do you know which part of the report that's discussed? Jocelyn, do you know?
Was that a matter in my evidence or in terms of the officer's report that was concerned? Because I think
It was in the table of changes.
right.
It's definitely in the table of changes that you submitted.
Because to the extent that my evidence engaged on the officer's report, I stated out up front that unless I specifically engaged on a provision, I was generally in agreement or didn't take issue with the officer's position. So without looking further into that, I'd just say that I didn't necessarily take issue with what the officer ultimately recommended, notwithstanding what the submitter may have sought. So that, from my view, that is. If it assists, I can have a look into that provision and comment further. But
Well, my question is, are you still standing by your request to change the word from high level to an acceptable level? Walkability through the area.
I'm just not sure what the provision is. We'll have to go away and have a look at which, so many submissions. I don't know. Can someone do a word search on the document?
If you want to come back to us later with an answer, that's fine.
Yeah, we're just doing a quick word search to see if we can find the. Do you want to deal with the other questions, and if we can sort this out while the other questions are going, we might be able to find it by word search, but I just don't know the particular submission at the moment. Okay.
No further questions.
Lindsay?
Yeah, just one. I guess I'm at a little bit of a disadvantage in that I haven't been involved in the Lincoln rezoning hearings and won't be involved in the NDRS. But I'm just interested in what's gone before in terms of the local centre zone change from neighbourhood centre zone. And presume, was there a submission on the proposed plan seeking that as well, or was this just come through NDRS requirements?
It's a good question because it has evolved quite a lot. I think by way of an overarching summary, through the PC69 process, 3 centres were proposed, distributed sort of evenly across the blocks, of one to the west, one to the east, and one centrally.
Neighbourhood centres.
Yes, well, albeit in the operative district plan change, that would have been
Yeah,
the
okay.
equivalent. And then through this process, my recollection is that the submitter identified the need or the desirability of having a larger centre to accommodate a supermarket, and the larger centre being a neighbourhood centre zone rather than a local centre zone. I'd have to check. My recollection is it's through the variation process that they've sought that, that they've submitted seeking that specific outcome, whereas the proposed plan.
So this is
neighbourhood centres.
this is the first time that change from neighbourhood centre to local centre has actually come to the surface.
That's my understanding, yes.
Okay, thank you.
uh, it's not.
So anything else for
Yeah.
the second submittal?
Correct.
Right. So I've just got a Mr. Akers. Can you hear us?
Yes, loud and clear. Thank you.
I just wanted to ask you about just one issue, and it's the, I guess, request to enable this additional supermarket with a maximum floor area of 4,500 square metres in the Springs Road area. And I was just wanting you to please address us further on the potential impacts, if any, that new supermarket might have on the viability of the existing quite large supermarket on Vernon Drive in Lincoln. Can you help us with that?
Sure. So in my evidence, I've laid out in figure 7 and in the discussion that follows that, figures 8 and 9, I've laid out the impacts that would be felt whilst I've classified it as the Lincoln KAC. In reality, it is the supermarket, the New World supermarket that you mentioned, because that is the major existing supermarket and grocery provider in Lincoln currently. So based on my analysis and the modelling that I've done, that those impacts at 4,500 square metres, if it were to be established in 2024, which is reasonably unlikely, that those impacts are around 17.4% on the existing supermarket. And that decreases over time as the market grows, reasonably strong growth in Lincoln on the PC69 land and other, to the point where it's my belief that by about 2028, that supermarket will be back to the position that it would have been in 2024. And that's laid out in the diagrammatically in figure 9 of my evidence on page 14. So an impact of 17.4% is, it's not insignificant, but it is not to the extent that would cause that market to close, in my opinion.
Oh,
Yeah, thank you for that. So that range of potential impact, is that kind of within the range of ordinary impacts that you might see from similar kind of developments where there's existing infrastructure?
Yes, and whilst there's no magic figure that says this impact rises above the effects of trade competition, the sort of the case law and the cases that I've been involved with have had impacts anywhere up to 30% to be considered as not rising above the natural, or I guess the trade competition effect. And obviously it does depend on the characteristics and the nature of the centres being impacted, but in a high growth environment such as Lincoln, effects of this scale are reasonably quickly eroded by additional household growth and additional demand, focused both on the Lincoln South Centre, but also on the existing supermarket.
Right, thank you very much. That's all I wanted to ask you about.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Now, Commissioner Solomon, we may be able to assist you with your question because we have found the submission. It's actually in relation to the subdivision chapter, which has a different section 42A report and a hearing next week. However, we're not appearing at that hearing, so you can take whatever you want from that. So this isn't a point that we'll be pursuing effectively. So it's just, I'm sorry, I was a little bit lost. It's just because it's in, and I'm very confused about what falls where as well. So it's submission on sub REQ 7 and yeah, and it's an RIDL submission, and we're not appearing next week in relation to that point. So that's that's us now, I think, until Rolleston.
Are you representing the airport?
Oh, yes,
This
I am
morning?
representing the airport, and I think I've filed some legal submissions saying we don't think this is the right hearing to be in, and we will see you at Rolleston. So unless you want to ask me any questions now, we were anticipating coming to the Rolleston rezoning hearing, and that's in relation to the portion of the PC 71 land that falls underneath the new and old contour, and we had interpreted that to be not included within the notified variation, and therefore effectively a Me Too submission and to be determined at the Rolleston hearing.
Okay.
But I just wanted to make sure that I was right on that.
No, that's fine. So the issue of the 50 decibel noise contour, the operative one versus the yet to be completed model one, that'll be dealt with at the Rolleston
So in
hearing.
relation to that particular PC 71, actually we are turning up next week in relation to qualifying matters. So
Yeah,
in a more general sense, we'll be here next week, but in relation specifically to that
okay.
only piece of land where the contour bites, which is that PC 71 land, we'll be specifically dealing with that at Rolleston.
So the generic issue of the operative contour versus the yet to be completed model contour, that'll be next week, and the site specific application of that will be at the Rolleston hearing.
Yes.
No, that's fine.
Yes.
That's fine. All right, so that brings us to the conclusion of the hearing for the day. The gentleman sitting at the back, who are you?
Council planners just sitting
Well, you should have come along yesterday, it would have been way more interesting for you. All right, so thanks very much to the submitters and reporting team. Anything before we wrap up?
Just a note in relation to the discussion on Res PC. That's correct, PC. I believe that as included in the notified version, that is a direct reflection of policy, the policies included in the Enabling Housing Supply Act. And therefore the change that the submitter is seeking is actually seeking to change a legislative direction. Whether or not it's worded, could be worded better. I believe that, as we've heard earlier, we're directed to impose as is. So I don't believe there's scope to change. So I just wanted to make that point.
Right, and thank you very much for that. So now this hearings 01 and 02 are adjourned. Well, no, they're closed, and we'll see relevant parties next week.